development of sport in society. The first accounts of football, there's some accounts of in around 1170 that young boys were going to the field to play a game of ball. So that was some of the first accounts. Mob football has been played for a long time, with the first account of this game not being known exactly, but it's thought to be around the 1400s. And then I've got a bit more on mob football. It was an annual sport which emerged in the country, specifically Ashbourne, which held the Royal Shrovetide football game, which occurred on Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Day. The sport was the main football game that was played in Britain around the time, so there was just not really much other sports going on, it was just mainly this. It was played in many different countries and had different rules because of this. It had no officials. Yeah. It was a very brutal game, involved two opposing teams trying to get the ball from one end of the village to the other. There was normally posts at either end of the village, and they just had to get it. The game didn't have a limit on the number of players each side, and eventually ended up with villagers playing each other. Some of the first accounts had about 1,000 people on each team. Bit of an intense game. Mob football was banned for nearly 300 years due to the intense violence that was involved within the sport, and it wasn't rare that deaths occurred in sport. This was before that was apparently, and it's in 300 BC, and there was documentation of this game in China. It consisted of a leather ball filled with hair and feathers and stuff, and it was just kicked into a net on 2 bamboo sticks. There was, in this documentation, there was talks of defence and attack and play as well, so just linked to football. There was also different variations of this game in Greek and Egyptian society. Not really Egyptian to them, but there's different variations. And the English equivalent of this game used an inflated animal's bladder, typically that of a pig's. In the 1300s, the game of football increased in popularity, and then King Edward II became worried that football was taking over people's lives and they didn't have enough time to practice their archery. This was because he was about to go to war with Scotland, so everyone tried to he tried to get everyone to practice their archery, so we had a better army in order to fight them, so he built football to distract them from that. And so that led him to ban football, and those who played it would face a substantial fine, and it made a fallout of the stocks. Football re-emerged after that, and then continued to grow after King Edward died, particularly in the working classes, because the working classes saw this game as a perfect opportunity to enjoy their leisure time and meet with their friends, and just generally play. Sometimes it was for money, sometimes not. The matches didn't always end in a civilised manner, with it not being officiated and having limited rules. It was a very violent game, with death not being uncommon. And then it really surprised me that it was acceptable in the game to beat up, destroy personal property, and in some cases destroy their homes and businesses, apparently. That's just wrong. Public schools. The idea of football in public schools was brought about when students would come to the schools. Students would come to the schools from different areas, and they'd bring in their ideologies of the game and teach others their specific rules, and eventually would end up playing it. This is where some of the early rules of football were created in the public schools. And football transcended through the class divisions and became extremely popular in public schools, etc. This provided the context for specific rules and regulations to be created, and so in 1848 a meeting at Cambridge drew up a common set of rules that could be used universally, and they were called the Cambridge rules. And they're one of two rules, I think the other one's the Sheffield rules. But these rules are the ones that outline things such as goal kicks, throw-ins and goalies' rights. These being the first steps of what we now know as modern football. The Industrial Revolution. During the Industrial Revolution, people from the countryside moved into the city in order to get better and, in some case, any job. And then this also took their versions of the game with them. But at the same time, they had less leisure time because of all the work, so they didn't get to play as much. So that. And then these are all the different organisations that are involved in football today. First one's the FA, and that's the major governing body in England, and takes responsibility for all that happens in the Premier League and in national competitions. The FA was founded in 1863, and this makes it the oldest football association in the world. Then UEFA. UEFA was founded on 15th of June in 1954, and that was in Basel, Switzerland, after consultation between the Italian, French and Belgian associations. Initially, the European Youth Football Union consisted of 25 members, which number doubled by the early 1990s. The UEFA is the administrating body for Europe, and it consists of 54 member countries. FIFA was founded in England on 21st of May 1904. The French name and acronym persists even outside of French-speaking countries, because FIFA is an acronym of a French name I can't pronounce. The first president of FIFA was Robert Kaine. I don't know how to say that. I'll say Gehring. Gehring was replaced in 1906 by Daniel Burley Woodford from England, by then a member of the association, so England was a member of the association by then. The first tournament FIFA staged, the association football competition for the 1908 Olympics in London, was more successful than its Olympic predecessors, despite the presence of professional footballers contrary to the founding principles of FIFA. PFA. The PFA was formed on 2nd of December 1907, so these are all kind of in the same times, early 1900s, as the Association of Football Players and Trainers Union, the AFPT, commonly referred to as, at the time, as the Players' Union. This was the second attempt to organise a union of professional footballers in England, after the Association Footballers Union, the AFU, formed in 1898, had been dissolved in 1901. Premier League. Despite significant European success during the 1970s and early 1980s, the late 80s had marked a low point for English football. Stadium of Cumberland supporters enjoyed poor facilities, hooliganism was rife, and English clubs were banned from European competition for 5 years following the Heathrow Stadium disaster in 1985. I'll go on to that later. The Football League's first division, which had been the top level of English football since 1888, was well behind leagues such as Italy's Serie A and Spain's La Liga in attendance and revenues, and several top English players had moved abroad to get more money in. At the close of the 1991 season, a proposal was tabled for the establishment for a new league that will bring more money into the game overall. The Founders Members Agreement, signed on 17th of July 1991 by the game's top flight clubs, established the basic principles for setting the FA Premier League. The newly formed top division would have commercial independence from the Football Association and the Football League, so it would be its own thing. The argument given at the time was that the extra income would allow English clubs to compete with the other teams across Europe and in the different leagues. The Football League. After 4 years of debate, the Football Association finally permitted professionalism on 20th of July 1885, when people could get paid to play. Before that date, many clubs made payments to professional players to boost the competitiveness of their teams, breaking FA rules and arousing the contempt of those clubs by abiding by the laws of amateur football association. It was the top level of football league in England from its foundation in the 19th century until 1992, when the top 22 clubs split away to form the Premier League. So there was the association. In the 20th century, it influenced football massively, because the rules were all been drawn up for about 50 years by then. So the game was pretty much all around the country as well as in many other countries, and everyone was playing the same kind of sport. Transport was improved massively in the 20th century due to the increase in technology and stuff. So this means that it's easier for teams to get around and play each other, and easier for players to get around to different places. So like a player in Coventry could still go play for a team in Leeds if they give them kind of thing. Also, communication was advanced as the telephone was invented, so to contact each other and to contact other teams was a lot easier, so you could arrange matches easier and stuff. Early rules of football. There was no limit to the amount of players you could have on the pitch at one time in the 1800s. That goes back to the mob football. But then the Highway Act was introduced in 1830, and that said that anybody who played football on the highway would have to pay a fine. The British have been considered as instrumental in spreading the game across the world, so that just means we were considered the biggest part of spreading the game across the world, with our players going over to different places, and our rules just being used all over the place. And the first ever match recorded outside of Europe was in Argentina in 1867, and that was led by several Englishmen who were working abroad at the time. Then we're going to women's football. Women have played the game since the 19th century, but especially so during World War One, because obviously all the men went off to war, to fight in the war, and all the women had to do the traditional male jobs, and then so the women thought to take part in this game of football as well. But after the war, women were banned for playing football as it was deemed as inappropriate, and it wasn't something that a woman should be doing. But the formation of the Women's FA saw the ban lifted in 1971, and the sport has continued to grow among women ever since. And the first women's football team to compete in an international fixture was a team from Preston, and they played Paris. This title was Christmas, but you'll see. It's one of the strangest games of all time, and it occurred on Christmas Day in 1914. And this game was called the Christmas Day Truce of 1914. The game was put together on the front line of the war. No one knows how or why, but what is known is that the English and the Germans put down the weapons for a night and entered into a ceasefire, and then they played football. And then, but the winner of the match is still unknown. Obviously, we've won, but it's not really known. But the two sides went back to fighting each other again the following day. So, weird game, but it happened. And then the footballing disasters. In 1989, the Hillsborough disaster saw 96 Liverpool fans lose their lives due to an overflowed stadium and mistakes made by the police. I'm not going to go into that. In 1985, the Hazel Stadium saw 39 people killed and over 600 injured due to a large group of Liverpool fans breaching the fence of a neutral area containing mostly Juventus fans, which resulted in a collapsing wall crushing many. This saw all English clubs banned from European competitions for the next 5 years, with Liverpool receiving a 6-year ban. 14 fans were convicted of manslaughter following this disaster. And then finally the 2010 World Cup. Until 1994, South Africa was still under an apartheid regime which saw segregation between white people and nearly all other races, specifically black people. And I researched into that a lot, it's actually really interesting. And that picture says it all. It was just complete segregation, white people there, black people there, not mostly black people, but others as well. And it was hoped that the World Cup would bring prosperity to South Africa, and it would show the world a different side to the country, which is a much more beautiful side. And that's it.
Brill. Okay, hang on mate, hang on. Right, decent slides. I think a few might have been better off with some pictures on, but you presented yourself really, really well. 1846, Factory Act. What was that? Tell me about it.
It was, did they bring in like specific hours that people could work or something, or maximum hours, so that they had more time to play football because they had more leisure time?
Yep, spot on. That's brilliant. Go on then, down to you. What do you think went well about that?
What about the whole presentation?
Yep.
The title. No, the way I presented it.
Yep. And a development point.
I didn't more information.
Yeah. I thought you researched it really well, I'll be honest.
Some of the bits were lacking a bit of information, so I thought I had a bit more into
Yeah. No, you come across really well. There was some really interesting points that you researched, so well done. Good stuff. Brill.